For as long as man has been alive, since before written word and recorded history, we have come up with stories of great and powerful men and women that fought amongst gods. In the modern era, we may not think of Theseus or Odysseus. We may instead think of Batman. And for every Batman, there must be a Batmobile. This is It Belongs in a Museum, and today we're doing something a little bit different. I'm once again joined by Alan,
Hey,
and today we're going to be talking about the Batmobiles of the live action and a couple from comics just because they fill some gaps and inform some of the designs. Basically, if Batman or Robin or Catwoman ride in it and it touches the ground, we're probably going to talk about it. We've got some interesting ones that I don't think people are as well versed in. Some TV shows, some theme park,
and are we emphasizing like we're talking about live action?
live action primarily, but we will briefly talk about animation and video game and comics simply because there's connective tissue between those and they kind of inform
Okay.
one another. And it speaks to the era they were
Interesting.
made in. But I genuinely I learned something about each one of these Batmobiles that even if I don't like the movie or what have you, I found myself really, really enjoying the amount of love and care that went into designing these cars. Even if the final design isn't my favorite, I was thrilled at discovering the real life stories and things that they made and the ways that they accomplished these things because on the movie it's just a Batman makes a
Yeah.
car and it's a team of very talented
You
people
don't
every single
yeah,
time.
you don't always see or appreciate the amount of work that goes into a design for a Batmobile.
So,
I'm personally curious to see how many of them lost a wheel.
I will say I have an interesting ranking for like for me what is like my personal favorite Batmobile, and when we get to it, I'll bring up why it is. It's for a very personal reason, and I know that our tagline is reality is stranger than fiction, and we're talking about cars from movies. However, we're talking about the real way they were made and like the cool real life influences on it.
Hmm.
So we are still, it's my show. I can do what I want.
Hmm.
So let me crack open the sacred texts. The Batmobile. When Batman debuted in Detective Comics number 27 in May of 1939, Bob Kane took all of the credit. However, by 1941, Bill Finger had already coined the term Batmobile for a car that Bruce Wayne was driving when in his disguise. It wasn't a specialized car, it was just one of his cars.
Hmm.
Would you like to guess the color?
I'm gonna say red.
Yeah, it's a red sedan.
I was thinking of like the older version from like the old like Adam West era and how it kind of had some red, and I was wondering if maybe there was like connective tissue
So
there.
that's not why that's red, but that was an accidentally perfect guess. And at some point in the comics, Batman gets into a car accident. Um, yeah, it was the 1950s. He gets into a car accident and he breaks his leg. And so it's Batman in his full costume with a cast on his leg in the hospital, and he designs a new Batmobile. And then it's the Batmobile with like the big design that we kind of think of as like the old Batmobile.
Hmm.
It's black, it's kind of exaggerated, has bat features for the first time.
Yeah.
But before that, before Adam West, we have the black and white movie serials, which were coming out amidst World War II.
Uh,
So there's plot lines involving like Japanese spies trying to get American information and like Batman branding them with permanent ink on their foreheads with a bat symbol, which is kind of a Zorroism left
uh,
over. So you can see the way that the culture of the time is impacting the stories. And in that one, he simply drives a 1939 Cadillac, and when the roof is down, it's the Bruce Wayne car, and when the roof converts upwards, it becomes the Batmobile.
ooh,
And another fun idiom about this is the fact that Batman, when he's taking people, he doesn't say, like, he takes them to interrogate them in the Batcave, but he doesn't call it the Batcave yet. He says, the Bat's Cave, possessive,
huh.
which is much pulpier, and you can kind of see the
Yeah.
DNA of what becomes what we know now. It's so fun. But yeah, in the 1950s, when Batman broke his leg, that was kind of their we need to update. So it was kind of, for people who know comic books, it's kind of like their first new 52ism, where like we need to update the way our characters look and act and make it
Yeah.
more quote unquote realistic, even though it is still an age of very silly stories.
Yeah.
So that's one that doesn't get a lot of coverage. I just wanted to give that guy some time. But now we're to Adam West. People know Adam West. Phenomenal, interesting guy. The car was designed by George Barris, whose day job was doing custom hot rods.
Oh,
He was given 15 days and $15,000 to make a Batmobile,
jeez.
which is the equivalent to about $160,000 in modern day. And he said he took it because the challenge sounded fun.
Wow.
So he bought a he in the interviews I was watching, he called it a Ford Futura concept car, but everywhere I've read about it, it says it's a Lincoln Futura car. But it was a Futura, and it was a concept car, and he bought it for $1 from the people that had it, like the museum. And they tore it down, and they added a whole bunch of stuff. They added labels and sirens, and the flamethrower on the
Uh-huh.
back was a $5 paint can with a hole cut into it.
Huh.
And initially, so the way they tested it is they would drive it out of the Batcave set, and it was painted matte gray with a white stripe down it, and it just didn't work. And so immediately, George said, "No, no, no," and he took it back to the shop. He hits it with a black gloss, and then he takes red sign paint that's reflective, like you use it on a stop sign, and he does all the details because he wanted the line work to shine, even on older TVs where visual quality is a little bit less. And they were like, "That's the look," and that's like it was so iconic. It started the comics and even Super Friends animation began borrowing that dual cockpit look. It started off with just the one car. They didn't have any doubles because it was expensive. But after a couple seasons, they got a couple of Ford Galaxies and they made molds of the shape of the main car and made based on those molds, they made fiberglass bodies to sit on a Ford Galaxy chassis, and then they could drive that around. It has a rumored top speed in real life, which, by the way, is very hard for research purposes because they'll a lot of research stuff will just tell you the in-universe
Mm-hmm.
fictional speeds of around 40 to 65 miles per hour. Once it was all done up, but originally some of the cars were said to have had closer to like 100 miles per hour. But apparently, any because Adam West got to drive a lot,
Mm-hmm.
Burt Ward sitting in the other cockpit.
Yeah.
He says the reason I love the quote. He says the reason that the boy wonder was white knuckle is because I like to drift the car and take the tail out next to the camera because the kids love it. And he was just what a phenomenal human being. And in 1986, though, amidst this sort of like goofiness, Frank Miller in the comics gives Batman a tank, and it changes something in the way that people perceive Batman. And that's important because the next Batmobile doesn't show up until 1989, and that is the moment that the Adam West design stops being kind of the predominant design theory. Anyway, so now we're to Michael Keaton, which is a Batmobile that is, I truly believe, iconic. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe if I was older, I would say the same about Adam West. I love the Adam West. When I play Arkham Knight, I like having the Adam West car because it's hilarious to me. But from Michael Keaton's Batmobile is it's very good.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the description for this was Batman is a myth. He's a regular guy trying to convince people of a supernatural tale, and so his car must be mythic too. And it was designed by Anton Furst, Julian Caldo, and John Evans. And John Evans was the fabricator of it. It was based on many cars, including the Salt Flat Racers and Stingray cars, but like the land speed record setters in the Salt Flats with these insane shapes that are almost inhuman. That's
That
what it
makes
was
sense.
kind of inspired by, and fighter jets and Gothic architecture, and it was just kind of like a smattering, and it was always very fluid in its shape and all the
Mm-hmm.
concept. It was originally built in a model scale clay and then scaled up, and so they scaled it to full size. Tim Burton walked in and he loved the design, but he said, "I don't see a door anywhere." And the designer, Julian, had forgot to include a door in the design. And so they were like, well, what if the whole cockpit just opened up like a fighter jet? And so you end up with the jet canopy top, which actually was too short for Michael Keaton's ears. So he had a special cowl that he would wear when he was sitting in the Batmobile that was a couple inches shorter so that his head would fit inside, which makes me feel better because my Batman toys didn't always fit inside the Batmobile either.
Mm-hmm.
They had two chassis. One was a Chevy Impala and one was an Oldsmobile Cutlass, because they both had box chassis that could easily be elongated for the long form of this. And
Um,
in the movie, you may recall that he has to use a grapple hook out of the side to do a
yeah,
sharp turn.
it's a
Be-
classic.
because of the axle distance between the front and the rear, it actually did have a really hard time turning.
Interesting.
So that's one of those things where the design kind of informs elements of the story a little bit. And at the time, it was hailed as being a realistic depiction of the Batmobile. Like it explains how he's doing this, how the Batmobile would work.
Yeah.
It was a higher level of fidelity than they could have done in the TV show. The front headlights of it are Honda Civic headlights turned upside down, while the taillights are Ferrari taillights. The front turbine is from a Vulcan bomber, and Tim Burton described the overall shape as tough and perversely phallic in quality. The paint that was used on it was called Flip Flop, and it was imported from Japan because it had a purple, black, and blue undertones depending on the angle you were looking at the Batmobile, which helps it stand out against a matte painting or
Hmm.
in the dark. It had a top speed of around 30 miles per hour, which is more than you need on a set
Right.
because it's not that big of a set, and it did really have trouble turning. It was it would then go on to influence the design of the Batman animated series with Kevin Conroy, including bleeding over into the design for like Arkham Asylum. You don't
Mm-hmm.
really drive the Batmobile, but it's there and it's still got
Yeah.
that elongated shape in the
Yeah.
cockpit. And even all the way into Arkham Knight when you do
I
have
would
the
argue that
Batmobile,
this is like the my internal like go-to for a while. This was what I thought the Batmobile looked like was
the
that.
Keaton one.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
Keaton one, the sort of like the cockpit style, like wings off the back.
it's very, very, very cool. It was largely unchanged even when it showed up in the Flash movie in 2021. They just recreated. I don't think it was still built on like a Ford Galaxy or
Mm.
what was that? It was a Chevy Impala. I don't think it was still built on like an Impala frame, because to my knowledge, anytime Keaton is in a vehicle, I think that was all CGI because no one does anything practically anymore for some reason. The machine guns that pop up, there's a great scene where two machine guns pop up on either side and it cuts through a door and the Batmobile then slides perfectly
Yeah.
underneath where it cut. That was actually three people, one driving and two inside operating the machine guns to make them rise up appropriately and turn.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that was a really cool little detail that I thought. So now we're on to Val Kilmer. So the change of the car was to go from dark noir to neon noir.
Mm-hmm.
And originally there were five different models pitched to Joel Schumacher, and he didn't like any of them because they weren't organic enough. So he was like, "Well, how do I get more organic?" So he talked to H.R. Giger, who designed a car, and people like to say that Joel Schumacher made things too silly. I don't think you'll be able to look at this car design and think that it is too silly. So there's a couple images here.
Uh-huh.
And for those who aren't as well versed in like movie knowledge, Giger is like the xenomorph. That is his work. He is a master of bioorganic horror. And it was described as the love child between a tarantula and a pair of scissors. And Schumacher loved it, but he said there's no way we can make that practically. It would have to be all CGI, but we want a real prop driving around. So I'm sorry we can't do it. But it did inspire something about the final design that they did go for. So the design element was it's a breathing beast with a rib cage and there's something underneath. I
Interesting.
never picked up on that once as a child. But once you
Yeah.
hear it and you see it, you don't unsee it.
It's such a fascinating evolution.
And that's a rib cage. And again, it does have a mildly phallic front to it
That's just
because
air
yeah,
resistance.
it's look at rocket ships, it's all the
Mm-hmm.
same way.
It's just for air resistance.
This one is actually my favorite Batmobile as a child because this was the one I had the toy of, and it could turn
Mm.
into the plane or the boat.
That's right.
So I have a special spot not because it's my favorite movie, but because it's the one that all of my action figures played with. And I think it went to a garage sale whenever I left for college or something like that. So I'll never see it again. But it was a real blast. Maybe I'll put it. I'm sure I can find a picture of the toy. I'll put it
Mm-hmm.
up. It was really cool. Um, yeah, Schumacher wanted Giger for his sensuality and anatomy in machines and design. It was too hard to do practical. Practical. It was the producers described the car as sexy and mean, a breathing machine. Tim Flattery was the one who ended up designing and sculpting it. Ultimately, he seems like a really fun guy from the interviews I've seen. It was he based the design on fish and microorganisms that live in pure darkness but have bioluminescence in the deep sea. And when you look at some of the species he was drawing from, you can see kind of some of the organic shapes that he mirrored. I had a custom chassis, so it's no longer being built based on a pre-existing car anymore.
Right.
It's all just up from the ground up scratch built. And it used carbon fiber for the first time for like the wings and stuff because it is much stronger and lighter. And at the time, that's really only being used for race cars and fighter jets.
Mm. Interesting.
It also used a hot air balloon motor for the flames coming out of the back.
Smart.
Apparently, Joel Schumacher used to let family and friends bring their kids to the set to sit in the Batmobile. And he said that it didn't matter if they were like 10 years old or if they were 18, everyone, whether they wanted to admit it at first or not, wanted to get in the Batmobile and press the buttons and get their photo taken. So I just think that's a beautiful story. People give Joel Schumacher such a hard time. Rest in peace. Now we move on to George Clooney. So which was one that I didn't really have any in my mind. It was the same Batmobile, and it is not at all. It turns out it's very different for a number of reasons, which I will show you here. If you want to just hold that tablet so you can look at it.
Oh.
Originally, there were no fins on the design that was presented, but Joel Schumacher wanted it to still have the bat design, and one of his producers wanted it to be double the size of the Forever car, so it's roughly double the length. And it is a single seat open canopy design for the first time ever. Return to open canopy like Adam West, but single seat for the first time ever. So it's mono cockpit in the middle. There's not room for a guest, and there's no roof to what he sits in.
Huh.
Yeah, really fascinating. And also, they had to come up with a special gear system for the wheels to make the bat signals stay upright at the top speeds that the car would be driving at. So they have this glowing blue thing there. As you can see on the front there, there's that sort of open shape, and it's the bat symbol.
Yeah.
And inside of it, in motion, it's turning, and it looks like the nacelles of the Starship Enterprise.
Uh-huh.
It's supposed to look like a nuclear reactor or something scientific. But when it's not coming at you at the right angle, it stops looking like a bat signal and looks like snarling teeth, like the car is alive coming after
Huh.
you. It no longer has a single jet on the back. It has 6 custom propane jet burners on the back that had specialized salts added to the propane to change the color to blue.
Huh.
The car was so expensive to make that they only made one. So there was no like stunt double one, and all of the stunts were done with either miniatures or CGI as a result.
Oh, interesting.
They actually used real tube neon, like you'd see at like a bar, inside of that. And they had to have tons of extra batteries running all through the hood because of the amount of neon being used. And the more I look at this, the more I couldn't even remember this if you had asked me before I did research. But now I kind of love it. It's got a really
There's a
sleek
lot of
design.
creative stuff going on for
Yeah.
sure.
It's interesting because some of the people who worked on the Forever car and are working on the Clooney car, you end up seeing are still working as of the Dark Knight trilogy on these cars. It's really, really cool. So the tires they got were custom prototype tires from a manufacturer, and they're bigger than they're supposed to be because that way you can cut your own tread. So they cut custom treads into them that were the bat symbol because they're like, well, why not? And an unexpected side effect was anywhere it drove, it left bat symbols,
Of course.
which is kind of amazing and very cool. Okay, so before we go to the Batman Beyond thing, let's talk about the Redbird, Robin's motorcycle that he gets in the George Clooney era.
Right.
So it was a ground up build. It wasn't based on any there wasn't like a frame inside of it that they
Right.
took from an existing motorcycle, but it was made primarily of fiberglass and based on Honda's off road motorcycle line. It was designed by TFX Studios, had a special suspension for doing jumps, an alleged max speed of 180 miles per hour, and was a 95 horsepower prototype 600cc Honda engine powering the whole thing.
Hmm.
So I remember as a kid thinking that Chris O'Donnell's Robin suit in Batman and Robin was the coolest thing ever. I didn't know who Nightwing was at the time. I didn't realize that was kind of his costume, but I thought it was incredibly cool. And I don't care what people say about the nipples. What I thought it was cool as a kid. I still think it looks cool as an adult. So I just wanted to put the Redbird up on there because Chris O'Donnell, cool design. And again, I was shocked by how many cool elements there were even to the George Clooney car that I didn't remember at all. But now it's really locked in. So now we're to the era of Christian Bale. We've left the sort of dark 80s, the neon 90s, and we've gone through a period of rest. And this is like a post 9/11, the financial crisis of 2008 is around the corner. The world is a different place. And this is Christian Bale's The Tumbler,
Mm-hmm.
based on a military Humvee meshed with a Lamborghini. Christopher Nolan's impetus for this was to not redesign his childhood because he says he wouldn't be able to. So instead to think of it how it served the story. So how does it show up in the movie? What is the plot relevance? What does it need to do How do you explain it? And that'll tell you what it should look like. It has no fins, no logo, no neon. And it was a callback to the Frank Miller tank from 1986 in The Dark Knight Returns with its
Right.
huge treaded tires instead of,
Yeah.
tank treads.
Yeah, that was a big thing with the chain. Once the Nolan movies came out, the tank design was huge.
Yeah, this was a really interesting design that they went with because it was designed by Nathan Crowley and Christopher Nolan, and they took turns just with clay and with model kits, making shapes and putting them together and seeing what worked. There was no concept art. It was only ever made in scale models out of parts
Wow.
that they had, almost like kids playing with Legos.
Interesting.
So by the time they turned it into like the designers and the proper 3D modelers that would do it in CGI and they would custom make the parts and everything, they didn't have art to try and extrapolate. They could just scan the model and extrapolate from there. Maybe change a few lines here and there to make it scale up correctly and for clearance issues and stuff. But it's really interesting. And there's so many, you can see at this point they really start documenting the process of making the Batmobile better because we have way more information on the next Batmobiles. Although the Batman actually didn't have as much information as I hoped it would. So the rear tires were 44-inch monster truck tires,
Interesting.
and it was a 100-mile-per-hour jumping beast. And when Christopher Nolan found out that it could jump, he was like, how can we put that in the movie?
Of course.
So the stunt people tested it rigorously to the point of destruction and then rebuilding so they could figure out everything. And one of the hardest things they had to deal with was in the model that was built, there was no front axle. The two front tires don't meet in the middle, they're hanging independent
Mm-hmm.
of each other. And so they had to make that work, which is very difficult because that's not how normal cars are built. They found that the jump balance, you don't want to land on your back tire because it causes catastrophic failure. You spring load the front and you want to just tap the front before, and so you sort of disperse in almost porpoise.
Yeah. That's
So you can see
interesting.
the way it lands that way.
Yeah, I remember it kind of landing like that. It's also interesting because by having it have the two sections coming out, it's kind of going back to the Geiger look almost.
Yeah. It was described by the people who then had to build it as the demon love child of a supercar, a military transport, and a stealth bomber, which is where you get those
Yeah.
plated designs up on top. It proves that the sky's the limit with the design. You can really take it anywhere as long as you give an explanation or
Yeah.
it fits the setting.
As long as it works within the story, it's
They had
you can
one
innovate with
they
it.
had one car with a working canopy. So anytime Christian Bale is getting in or out, that's the one car and it's meant to do that. And the canopy was described as opening and closing like a flower's petals,
Hmm.
which you don't think of and then you watch the movie again, you're like, "Oh, yeah, I see that." And then they had another car for the driving stuff. So there was one specifically for each of those. According to Christian Bale, driving inside of it was like having Ozzy Osbourne screaming in your ear. It was very loud. It had small windows to see out of, so they also used monitors inside to see sort of like a backup
Huh.
camera that's always on, but not just for the back. They drove this car like legitimately through walls, over cars, and up and down insane slopes, and it wasn't braking.
So we're kind of reached a point of the Batmobile kind of actually starting to function like a
Yeah,
Batmobile.
they genuinely built it to the point that it was they didn't have to like have a stunt version of the driving car. They just really did that. In fact, there's a really cool thing here. The car was so fast, even while smashing through center blocks and stuff like that, that the camera car that has like a gimbal on top of it to sort
Uh-huh.
of get up was having a hard time keeping up with the Batmobile for filming. So for The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises, Christopher Nolan had all of these Mercedes cars supercharged so they could keep up with the Batmobile. He didn't say slow down. He said we'll make faster camera cars.
It's an amazing decision.
Christopher Nolan is so good. The stunt driver's favorite thing he did was a 40-foot jump in Chicago, which is the jump from like the rooftops down onto the road.
Yeah.
Or yeah, and then there's another one in The Dark Knight where he jumps over a car and there's the Joker shoots a RPG and it explodes
Yeah.
the car underneath him. And so for that jump, it's dark. It's at night. He's jumping a car and if he jumps too far, he hits the ceiling because he's in a tunnel.
Right.
And while he's doing that, the VFX people also said, "Hey, do you want to also trigger the pyrotechnics?" And he was like, "Sure, give me the biggest button you have." And so he has a button to his right, and right as he says he reaches the apex of the jump, and as he's about to feel the car going down, he slams that button, and the explosion goes off, and he lands it. So they really did like those jumps. They really did smash through cars. It's just an incredible accomplishment of engineering. And originally in Batman Begins, the Tumbler was supposed to be destroyed at the end, but everyone became so attached to the car that they refused to kill it off. It became a character. So in The Dark Knight, Nolan was like, we have to kill it now. They were pushed really hard to change it somewhat. It has a motorcycle escape pod thing that pops out of the side.
Uh,
So that way it can the description from the people who designed it was they wanted the Batmobile to continue the fight even after it was gone.
that's smart.
And that's why the UI system says goodbye in a voice before it blows up. It's literally the car saying goodbye because the
Brilliant.
the cast and crew had become so attached to it. And then the Dark Knight motorcycle pod was again just a total scratch build based off of that design. So it has to look like it popped out of the side of your
Yeah.
tumbler. And so now we can talk about the Bane Armada. And I accidentally skipped the Batman Beyond thing, so there's a few sentences I'll include. I'll go back to that in a second. The Bane Armada is meant to represent Bruce Wayne's power turned against him and against Gotham, according to Christopher Nolan. It's the price of power, and for abusing that power, like Lucius had said with the surveillance system, it's supposed to
Mm-hmm.
be like, this is what could have happened if you couldn't rein in your anger and your grief, like
Mm-hmm.
after losing Rachel. The tumbler, according to Nolan, represents wealth and military might being stolen and used against America. So
Huh.
it's like sort of a political commentary. And in The Dark Knight Rises, you have more crude weapons and more aggressive. It goes back to camouflage, looks much more like military Humvees as a representation of what Batman would have looked like if he didn't rein in his self control and became much more like Frank Miller's tank driving,
Mm-hmm.
kind of crazy Dark Knight. The Batwing hover car, or hover device from The Dark Knight Rises, because he doesn't use the tumbler proper, was a practical prop that was on wires being. They had that thing with its spinning propellers and lights
That's
swinging over the
crazy.
top of them, really in frame. Couldn't do it on wires. They had a gimbal car that was driving that would have it up on top of it, elevated. It was based on the VTOL capabilities of a mixed with a tank, kind of mirroring a bit of Batman Beyond, which is actually a good segue back to the Batman Beyond little tidbit that I accidentally missed. The Batman Beyond one was the follow up to Kevin Conroy's stuff.
Uh,
And it was based on a fighter jet and a roadster, mirroring Star Wars prequel ship designs like the
makes
speedsters
sense.
you see or Blade Runner spinners.
Makes sense.
Before we get into the more recent movies here, we're going to stop and we're going to look at the Batwoman CW Batmobile, which I bet you didn't know existed.
I did not.
So, this is what it looks like.
Okay.
It's just a 2021 C7 Corvette.
Right. It's
With
just a car.
it's just a regular car with plastic parts stuck to it and cheap vinyl stickers.
I mean, yeah, it doesn't. I mean, the way we've described it, you could just say a lot of Batmobiles are cars with stuff stuck to them, but this is like,
This isn't even body work.
yeah,
Like
this
you
isn't
can do
even
more than this at an actual auto
like
shop.
this is. I would see someone that's like, oh, this person likes Batman as they're driving down the street.
Yeah,
Like, this is a Batman fan's car.
that's a dude who vapes a lot and really has strong opinions on Batman.
But like, not a Batmobile.
Yeah, that's a Batman fan car. Yeah, and it is featured heavily throughout all but the first season because COVID caused them to not be able to use it in the season finale of season one. But then they used it in the rest of the show, which apparently ran on much longer than I thought it did. But now we get to talk about another car that I didn't even know existed. I found it by accident while researching the movies. It was so cool. I wanted to stop and talk about it. It is this Batmobile from the Australian theme park that I'd never heard of before
Oh
called
my
Movie
goodness.
World. It is called the JL52, as in Justice League New 52.
Right.
And it's kind of like their Six Flags or Disney,
Uh-huh.
but this is Warner Brothers, apparently. It's based on the HSV Senator, which is a Holden model, which is a Australian brand. And it's based on the sedan. Has a LS3 motor, which is interesting because, if memory serves, that's actually what they put into one of the other Batmobiles we'll talk about. Has a custom body frame on it. And the coolest part about this, it is the first street legal Batmobile,
Whoa.
which is pretty cool. It's legitimately like very cool. The inside is like passably awesome with like buttons and switches and screens. And it has, I'll pull over this image. It's hidden pretty well. Oh yeah, this is their Robin as well. I think the costumes aren't movie quality, but they're great for a theme park.
Yeah.
So if you look to the side, you'll see something hanging out the side, right? Off the
Yeah.
bottom. That's not like Michael Keaton's where he has like the leg breaker that he can deploy. Uh, That's so that they can stand on Batman and Robin can stand on a padded sort of stand on the side, and for parades throughout this, they can be just standing there on the outside of the car waving to the kids so the kids can see them. Or for photos, they can kneel down and not hurt their knees with the kids next to it. That's the level of thought they put into this.
That's brilliant. And that's a strangely Batmobile-like function, just have something pop out for that.
Yeah. So this is I think this is the opposite of the Batwoman thing where I'm like, this actually doesn't look like a regular car. It has its function built, and just the fact that it's like even the Bat logo in the front nose.
And like even though it's arbitrary because it's like, it's not it's a fictional world, there's something so exciting about finding out like with the Nolan stuff as well that there's so much practicality put into it.
Yeah.
There's just something exciting about seeing it being brought to life.
However, I will say this is also a gray Batmobile, which is this is the first gray Batmobile we've talked about. But the Batman v Superman Batmobile, Ben Affleck's Batmobile, is also gray,
Mm-hmm.
which is a departure from the colors that we've seen before,
Yeah.
where they primarily been a glossy black or some derivative of that,
Yeah.
right? So as far as practicality, in my research, I was kind of shocked. Donut Media, which is a car-based YouTube channel, used to be really good, got bought by private equity, kind of blows now. When they talked about these Batmobiles, they said that this Ben Affleck Batmobile was always 100% CGI. And so I'm calling it out. It was not fake. Ben Affleck's first Batman photo was him standing next to the Batmobile. That was how they revealed his suit. The Ben Affleck Batmobile was designed by Patrick Tatopoulos. I hope I said his last name right. He's not just a designer, he also directed Underworld Rise of the Lycans, the medieval
Oh,
werewolf movie, which is a phenomenally fun movie. I didn't under
wild.
Yeah, that's just cool. The first sketch of the Batmobile was done on a coffee shop napkin.
Huh.
It blends Nolan's and Burton's shapes. The
Uh,
designers all visited the Warner Brothers vault to study past cars, which we've talked about now, for reference. It had a 550 horsepower engine with a monster trunk transfer case to the wheels
Makes
because
sense.
the engine had to be mounted backwards. They had to custom set it up in a weird the shape of it, the engine is like behind the driver. So it's like a
Right.
mid rear engine car.
Interesting.
It had a custom chassis again. I think at this point there's even the Batman, and I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I suspected that was based on an existing car. Totally. Since Schumacher, they've just been original chassis up. Like it's just all new. It was 500 pounds per tire, and they trimmed each of the tires down by about 150 pounds per tire to make it more manageable. And they
Huh.
spent a lot of time designing and testing it in Michigan near the in the Chrysler Proving Grounds, which is kind of cool because Detroit was like the Motor City. Like Michigan was the automotive location for a very long time in American history. It was the wealthiest city in America for like a decade. It was
Hmm.
opulent. So it's kind of cool to see automotive work done there again. And they did what Nolan did, where they kind of tested and they learned to stunt and they learned how to like drive and drift. And the thing they learned for this is it's a drift car. The rear is very heavy. So you need to factor in your like
So,
S turns and
so you could
drifting.
hypothetically do the Adam West era as like the kids will love this.
They did that in the movie, apparently. It was designed to look battle worn, so it has scratches and replaced areas where holes used to be, or intentionally kind of ugly slapped on welds done after the fact to make it look like he's been using this car for a long time. And
Mm,
I remember when the first Justice League movie sort of was about to come out in that era, people thought that he was playing an older version of Michael Keaton because his actions lined up with Michael Keaton and his car just
yeah,
looked like an extrapolation of that car. So I think in a way, the fact that this has a lot of those same shapes convinced people that that was kind of supposed to be.
interesting.
There's even a line in the theatrical movie about Alfred saying it was easier when they used to fight bad guys with wind up penguins
Hmm.
and stuff. So for a while, it was canon that he just was Michael Keaton,
Which I kind of like. It's
and then the
kind of
Flash, I
crazy.
guess, changed. I don't know. I didn't see the
I
Flash
kind
movie.
of like the idea of him being just older Keaton though. That's
He just
fun.
got taller and very, very wide. It has a hidden bat logo in the snout of the car based on like a Hemi Barracuda like muscle car design, but the front of the car, and I guess I should pull up a picture of the car for you to see since the people watching can see just fine. Right there, it's a negative
Oh.
space bat hidden inside of the design. Because the idea is this Batman isn't into like flashiness, it's form over function. So the car weighed around 8,500 pounds, had custom Brembo brakes. It really drove through explosions for real. It was designed for just a small chase, but when they saw the design elements that the team had put on it, like the big cannons, like the anti like vehicle cannons and the flare guns and everything else that they had added as detail on top of the car. They were like, well, how do we fit that into the Batman would use those gadgets? So a small chase scene turned into a major set piece chase at the docks. It was purpose built machine, according to the director. The stunt driver's name was Mike Justice. The car is itself doing a lot of callbacks to Michael Keaton. There's references in the cockpit to a cable cutting hoist,
Huh.
like in the opening. So again, I think that's where some of those beliefs come from about it. And
It makes me think back to, wasn't the idea behind the original, like the Dark Knight comic, of the idea of a Batman as old as his character?
it was supposed to be a Batman who embodied
So it's
everything
kind
of
of
that.
fun to see the ideology of that inspiration leading into some people think of a Batman as old as his movies.
Yeah, yeah, I guess yeah, yeah. Oh, for the Justice League movie, there was a slight revision to the design with a gigantic cannon in the passenger seat because they're fighting aliens. You need bigger weapons for that. It was meant to signify Batman finally filling that empty space in his life again and slowly learning to work with a team. So the idea that maybe he could have a partner in there again, because it's like the step in between letting someone
Mhm.
sit with you. The big crawler thing from the movie was just a cockpit, as far as I can tell, and it was CGI. It's not really based on any existing cars. It's just kind
Mhm.
of a cool spider
I mean, I
vehicle
feel like
thing.
Batman, I'm not super familiar with his Justice League runs, but I feel like he busts out a weird, like, bat thing
There are
every
plenty of
Justice League
yeah.
runs.
He's got plenty of comics where he just has like a bat rocket ship.
Yeah.
Like it's absurd.
So
Um,
I liked that crawler element. It was fun.
the Flying Fox was a troop transport that they used for a lot of the dialogue scenes in the Justice League movies, and it's also present in the Flash movie where we see Batman using a Batman motorcycle. The original Batbike was designed to have a hover element to it, and it was supposed to be in the Justice League movie, but they cut it for whatever reason, probably the kerfuffle around the production of it. And by the time Andy Muschietti of the It Chapters 1 and 2 movies did it, it was just a regular bike. It has multiple tires instead of just one front, one back. It has a battering ram it can deploy up front. Now, obviously, these are all fictional, but there are things that are attached either in CGI or practically. Has an ejectable spike strip thing that it does. It has angular jet propulsion for sharp turning, a ballistic shield, and for some reason makes Ben Affleck's face look like he's wearing a fake CGI cowl all of the time. So here's the fun part about this. Stunt driver Rick English, who did all the stunts on the bike for the Flash, is also Robert Pattinson's stunt driver in The Batman.
Hey.
So Robert Pattinson, we'll start off with his motorcycles. His motorcycle, for neither his drifter persona nor as Batman, neither one of them are real motorcycles you can buy. They were designed by Ash Thorpe, who was a CG modeler, and he based them on Ducati and Hayabusa, which if you're into motorcycles at all, Hayabusa, you already know what that is. And Catwoman had an interesting design as well that was designed by someone who wasn't Ash Thorpe. It was a Japanese designer and is again 100% original, not actually based on any existing platform, just meant to look sleek and cool and sexy. So the design, it was designed to say that Bruce is ignoring Wayne Industries and his allies and building it all himself. So he manufactured. There was no Lucius Fox for it. It's him.
Huh.
He's welding this car. He's doing it there. He's not relying
I mean,
on
I always
other
assumed he
people.
built it himself until we got to like the Nolan era, where like the Lucius character was
Yeah.
introduced.
Let's see. The Batmobile was also designed by Ash Thorpe using all of the design styles they've done before: cast metal, fiberglass, carbon fiber, but also 3D printed elements, not just regular 3D printed, but 3D printing metal as well, which is a crazy technology. It was inspired by Fast and Furious
Huh.
in its design. The front doesn't have a bat logo, it has a battering ram,
Huh.
which is like their brutalist bat logo. It's like it's a battering ram bat.
That's fun.
It has a big block LS3 engine, so again, like the theme park LS3 engine, and uh, it's the first time since Schumacher that neon is in the Batmobile again,
Wow.
which is not a connection you would make at first glance. But yeah, I'll let you look at that.
Huh.
So it has a fake engine, both in the back and fake backfire that happens in the front of the hood. It's meant to look like it's a breathing, screaming manifestation of Bruce's barely controllable rage. It uses Futura-inspired rear elements where you see it sort of forks out here, sort of like the fins on the old Adam West. but is based on a Dodge Challenger in the front. It was painted to look abused and grungy, so like the mud and the scratches are painted onto it,
Hmm.
so it's never clean. It is an all-wheel drive car that has the ability to, at the switch of a button, go from all-wheel drive to front-wheel drive to rear-wheel drive for the aid of the stunt team whenever they need to like oversteer or understeer for a stunt.
Oh.
So apparently that was a big thing they were big on. It has a sexy leather BDSM inspired interior because apparently all Batman have sexual undertones. It has an original chassis that is built on again. There were four vehicles made: a ramming car, a lighter weight jumper car, a pod car, which looks like that car, but with a seat on the hood or on the top of the car for the stunt driver
Mm-hmm.
to be actually driving while Robert Pattinson is acting inside. And then a hero car, which was actually an EV. Apparently, the EV could be quiet on set and you didn't have to worry about emissions inside of like small confined
That's
spaces.
smart.
But all the other ones were V8 engines. So all of the like stunt ones were V8, but the hero car is an EV with fake engine effects all over it. Apparently, it was a 700 horsepower V8 engine. Robert Pattinson described driving it as sounding like you're driving an airplane.
Hmm.
It had a custom transfer box based on a rally car. I already said it has the button that swaps between the driving modes. They had a Nolan style testing circuit where they would abuse it,
Mm-hmm.
and learn all this stuff. And then they had sort of famous chase scene he has with Colin Farrell on the highway, 100% fake rain in that scene,
Huh.
so that they would have better line of sight and stunt work and safety. And it's
Makes sense.
flawless CGI rain. If I had not seen the VFX breakdown, I would
Is
not have
water
believed
really hard to do?
it is. I was impressed. The car was supposed to be intense, real, out of control, and represent that both the man and the car can be defined by those traits, according to Matt Reeves. And as of right now, that is all of the Batmobiles that have existed in live action. And that is the story of how they were made. So the only question really remains is, do you think they belong in a museum?
I mean, if they can't, I don't have a big enough garage, so yeah, I guess just go ahead and put them in a museum.
It's kind of a silly question because they are, to my knowledge, at various times of the year in different automotive museums. I believe that Warner Brothers has auctioned some of them off because I believe they're in a
Probably.
bodacious amount of financial ruin. But, you know, they are in museums, and it is just, it's fascinating because you'll see in the interviews I was watching, the people who would design the car would then describe, on like the Nolan movies, sending the stunt driver to go out, and they're worried like sending your boy off to school for the day. Is he going to be okay? Like, is the car going to treat them right?
Mm.
So it's this really beautiful kindness in designing these cars. There's very nice engineers, very talented stunt people, great cinematographers, and I think that even for people who maybe don't like a George Clooney movie or something, we can appreciate the design and the effort and the thought and just how much fun it must be when you find out you get to make a Batmobile.
Yeah.
So I know this has been a little bit stranger. It is going to tie into the next episode that I've planned, which is kind of a technology that almost took off but didn't, and I kind of wish it would because it's very cool. And then that's going to tie into the next story. And the next story, we've got like four or five stories that all kind of tangentially touch with one another on topic, and then lead us into like a very wild crescendo of historical events happening. But
Hmm.
I thought I'd start off because it's going to get kind of crazy in the next couple episodes to do something a little fun and lighthearted. And I know that you're a huge Batman fan,
Mm-hmm.
so I figured, hey, this seems like a perfect conversation to have. And again, I learned so many fun new details about each one of these cars, even the ones that I don't like overall, or I don't like the movie that they're in. I really appreciate the love that went into making them now.
Yeah.
And there are so many wonderful automotive museums and car shows. There's almost always a car show somewhere near you. Please look for a nearby car show. Go witness some history, talk to some people. It's such a fun element of like it's history you can drive. That's really cool. Thank you so much for tuning in. We love talking to you about history and science. We're going to talk a lot about science in the next few episodes and some crazy historical stuff. And this has been a blast.